So we'll start off Unit 2 much in the same way we started off Unit 1. We'll talk about the basic unit of biology. Okay, we talked about the basic unit of chemistry, the atom. Now we're going to talk about the basic unit of biology, the cell. Okay. So the key points for today: know the points of the cell theory and how they relate to living organisms. Okay, know who contributed to the development of the cell theory. Thankfully, it's a lot less than what you needed to remember for the atomic guys. Okay, and recognize the implication of the similarities between plant and animal cells in terms of evolutionary relationships. Okay, and we will talk a little bit about natural selection and evolution in this unit. Okay, I won't tell you anything that's contrary to what you learned in religion class. As you probably know, Pope Francis is actually a scientist, okay, as well. He has a degree in chemistry. And he is very kind of forward-thinking in terms of trying to explain and rectify what the perceived disagreements. There aren't really disagreements. There's perceptions, okay, that there's disagreements, but there really aren't any. And we'll talk about that a little bit as we go along as well in this unit. Okay? All right. If something is alive, what are some characteristics of a living thing? What does it got to be able to do? Okay, so breathing, I mean, not all living things breathe, but they do exchange gases, right, in some way. They got to exchange oxygen for carbon dioxide, or if they're a plant, vice versa, carbon dioxide for... Be able to get its energy. Okay, so the process of acquiring energy is what we call metabolism. Okay, so a living thing has got to carry out some kind of metabolism. That is, carrying out chemical reactions that produce energy that allow it to do things. Okay, react to stimuli. To an extent, if I come over here, I hate you, plant! Well, that's just because I yelled at it, though. Okay? Not all things are going to react to stimuli, although there was an interesting study that was done on how, like, talking to plants. You all know, of course, that if you talk to your plants, they grow better because you're breathing carbon dioxide on them. But I saw an interesting study about how you talk to the plant and how it grows, and it showed there was actually no correlation. Like, they had people that were, like, singing to it, talking nicely to it, or talking abusively to it, and it made absolutely no difference. So not everything is going to react to stimuli there, but yeah. So you're not going to hurt a plant's feelings. Yeah. Yeah, certainly, like animals, more complex organisms would certainly show reactions to stimuli, but plants in a way have abilities to adapt, not so much react, but adapt to their surroundings, which would be kind of reacting to stimuli. Okay, so we got metabolism. What else? Really, I usually get this one first and no one's getting it. Okay, grow, yeah, expand, grow. What about this one? Usually this is the one people think of first. Your guys' minds aren't in the gutter, I guess. That's good. Okay. All right, they got to be able to reproduce as well. All living things have to be able to reproduce, propagate, pass on their genes. Okay, so anything else? All living things would show or do or produce waste. Okay, that'd be part of metabolism, but certainly produce waste. Okay, convert gases, yeah, so exchange gases, again, that'll be part of metabolism, yeah. Okay, what about not maybe things that they have to do, but things that they would have or show? Okay, so some sort of physical manifestation, tissue. Tissue is made of what? Cells. That's the key. Okay, if we don't say that all living things have to have cells, and we only go by this list, fire is a living organism. Because fire consumes fuel, it grows, it reproduces, sparks can start new fires, okay, and it definitely produces waste. Okay, if we don't say that all living things have to have cells, chemical reactions become living things, and that's not true. Okay, now there are of course some organisms that we consider to be sort of living that don't necessarily show all of these characteristics, especially the part about having cells. What particular thing am I thinking of? A virus. Okay, viruses, which is something in the AP course we're going to talk about a little bit, okay, viruses are not necessarily truly living things because they aren't made of cells. Okay? Yeah, actually, they're an intracellular parasite is what they are. Okay, they have no metabolism. Okay, they don't consume energy. They don't use it to grow. Okay, in fact, they don't really grow. They can't reproduce on their own. They use the cellular machinery of another cell to reproduce. Okay, and all they are is a coat of a shell of protein surrounding genetic material, either RNA or DNA. Okay, so they aren't a cellular organism. Okay, and they can't reproduce on their own. They can't carry out any metabolism. Okay, which is why I always find like advertisements on the side of cleaners so funny. Okay, like if you look on the side of like Lysol wipes and things like that, it says kills the flu virus and like kills 99% of flu viruses. You know what kills 100% of flu viruses? Time. If a flu virus is on your counter, it's going to die anyway because it can't do anything. Okay, without a cell to do all of its dirty work, it's just going to break down and die anyway, if it's even alive to begin with. Okay, now obviously, if somebody coughs onto a countertop, you should wipe it off because in that sputum is going to be cells and other things that a virus might stay alive in long enough to infect you. Okay, so you definitely want to stay away from things like that. But if you're going into a room and no one's been in it for a week, you don't really need to worry too much about something on the countertop hurting you. Okay, at least not a flu virus; it's dead already. All right. So this picture of a cell here, okay, that's a plant cell. And obviously we can see it's got a lot of different structures. One of the big points of this unit is cellular structure. What do all the parts of the cell do? What are they called? Okay, so biology is a little different than chemistry. Chemistry was a lot of skill demonstration. Biology is a lot of memorization. Okay, and more application as opposed to skill demonstration. So you'll study for biology differently than you studied for chemistry. In chemistry, hopefully you did a lot of practicing of things, whereas in biology you're going to do a lot more reading and making notes and things like that. Okay, so with my notes package for this unit, you should be highlighting things and then probably making up like your own maybe like recipe card kind of notes or stuff in the margins, things like that. Okay. To keep you from having to read the entire notes package over again. Okay, you want to highlight the stuff that's important and summarize things and make it in your own words so it makes more sense. Okay. All right, points of the cell theory. The first and most important point, which was what all this preamble was about, is that all organisms are made up of cells. Okay, all living organisms must have cells. They could be unicellular, which means they're single-celled, like an amoeba or a paramecium, okay, or these actinopods and things like that. Okay, or they could be multicellular, like that cactus over there. Okay, is a multicellular organism. We, of course, are multicellular organisms. Okay, there's only 3 points to the cell theory. Okay, the second point is that a cell carries out the basic functions of an organism. Obviously, if you're a single-celled organism, yeah, it has to or you'll die. Okay, as a single-celled organism. If it can't carry out things like acquiring food, pulling energetic molecules from the food, breaking them down for energy, getting rid of wastes, and all that kind of stuff, then the cell will die. So a cell will carry out the basic functions of an organism. And that is true for a multicellular organism as well. If I take one of your cells and I put it in a nutrient-rich medium, okay, because I can't just hold it in my hand, it's not going to survive then, okay, but I put it somewhere where it can acquire all the stuff it needs, it'll survive on its own. Okay? It has to be able to carry out the basic functions of the organism. That's not true for every cell in your body, obviously, okay? But it's true for the vast majority of them. Many of your cells are dependent on other cells of the body. That's kind of the catch of being multicellular. You become more complex, you're able to do more things, but your cells become increasingly dependent on other cells for things. Okay? Because a multicellular organism, okay, shows something we call specialization, which we'll talk about later. Okay? That's what makes a multicellular organism different from a collection of single cells working together, okay, is this thing called specialization. All the cells in your body have differences. Okay? Your liver cells are different from your muscle cells because they do different jobs. Okay? The liver cells are specialized to do the job of cleaning your blood and breaking down toxins and getting them out of your body. Whereas your muscle cells are specialized for exerting forces, changing shape, and moving you around. Okay? They have very, very different jobs. And thirdly, new cells are not created. There is not a cell factory in your body that's pumping out new cells. Because how could it do that? It would have to be centrally located and then make a muscle cell, and somehow that muscle cell goes to where it's needed. That doesn't make any sense. Okay? Cells are not created. They come from the division of existing cells. Okay? If you need more muscle cells, then the muscle cells you have to divide to do that. Okay? If you need more liver cells, the liver cells divide to make more liver cells. Okay? And this process started very, very early on for you. Okay? When sperm met egg 16, 17 years ago, okay, that was the first cell, okay, for you, for your body. Okay? That cell divided countless times to produce you. Okay? All the genetic material necessary to make you was there from that very moment. Okay? The moment of conception, you're there. Okay? All the genetic material necessary to make you was there at that very moment. Okay? The very first cell. And from there, divided to 2, to 4, to 8, to 16, and so on, okay, until eventually you were this ball of cells. Okay? And then the ball starts to do something really cool. It starts to specialize. So groups of cells within the ball start to become different than others. Okay? And we know from embryonic studies that this group of cells is destined to become your nervous system. And this group of cells is destined to become your liver and digestive tract. This group of cells, your muscles. This group of cells, your heart. Okay? All of those kind of things. That's where stem cells, embryonic stem cells, come from. Okay? Is from these little embryos, okay, that are going to become a person eventually. Okay? Which is, of course, why the Catholic Church frowns on abortion, because we believe that right from that very moment, everything was there. Okay? That moment of conception is the moment where you became you. Okay? Just so you know, that's the scientific reasoning behind it. Okay? All the genetic material was there. Okay? It's also why the Catholic Church frowns on the use of embryonic stem cells. Okay? A lot of countries have said that embryonic stem cell research is okay, and they're going forward with it, and it does have a lot of really incredible medical benefits. Okay? The problem is, if you take those cells from an embryo, what have you done to it? You've killed it. Okay? You can't take the cells from an embryo that are going to become its liver and have it survive. Okay? So there is that trade-off. So what they do is they take sperm and egg that have been donated, and they fertilize the egg with the sperm, and they grow it in a tube. They grow the embryo in a test tube. And when it gets to a certain level of development, they begin harvesting the cells from it. But with a syringe, like they just pull them off. Okay? And then they'll grow those, they'll culture them in a nutrient-rich medium, and they'll grow not into a liver, like you're not going to grow a liver, but you'll grow liver tissue, so healthy liver cells that can then be grafted onto a recipient. Okay, so they've had a. Well, I mean, theoretically, yes. Practically, no. Basically, no one has really allowed the development that far along. I mean, yeah, you could, as long as you could keep supplying the energy demands of the growing embryo and fetus. Once it gets to a certain size, it really needs a mom to supply all the needed stuff, right? Okay, but at early stages, at least, the early embryonic stages, it can be done in a test tube and then harvested. And in fact, that's how a lot of people who are unable to have children on their own end up having children, is they have the fertilization occur externally, and then they implant the fetus artificially. So they get it to a certain developmental stage, and then they put it into the uterus. And usually the mother's had hormone therapy and whatever to have the uterus ready to receive the embryo. Yeah. Just put it on my desk there, Jake. Thanks. Okay, does that sort of make sense? Okay, but everything, all cells come from the division of existing cells, which is why certain injuries are unrecoverable, because certain cells will not reproduce in your body once you reach a certain age. Okay? For example, nerve cells. You have more nerve cells, brain cells, when you're first born than you'll have at any other time in your life. Okay? They start to degrade, you start to lose them, okay, almost immediately. Okay? They do not divide and repair, which is why paralysis is usually permanent. If your spinal cord is severed, then those cells are not going to repair and grow back together. Okay? That paralysis would be permanent. Although, I saw some stuff when I was in university when stem cell research was just kind of coming out, where they did studies on rats where they severed their spinal cords. I know that's kind of cruel, but okay, they severed their spinal cords and then they grew spinal nerve tissue from embryonic stem cells from the rats, grafted it across the break, and they were able to regain the use of their legs. Not fully, but they were able to regain the use of their legs afterwards. So there was a lot of really kind of interesting medical research in regards to that. The good news is that we've also furthered our ability to use what are called pluripotent stem cells, which are the ones that are in your body as an adult. Okay? They can harvest those and now use them to do essentially all the stuff they did with embryonic cells before. Okay? So they can use those now much better than they could in the early going. All right. So, development of the cell theory. Cells are actually, in terms of science, something that is huge in terms of research. But we've known about them for several hundred years. Okay? 1665, a guy named Hooke discovered cells in a slice of cork using a microscope that he made, because he was actually a physicist. Hooke has a law, which you'll learn in Physics 20, Hooke's law. It governs the forces exerted by springs based on how much you compress or stretch them. Okay? He developed this microscope as a lens experiment, okay, using combinations of lenses to divert the path of light. And he thought, you know what, if I put these lenses together, I might be able to diverge the light and make what I'm looking at bigger. And by accident, okay, he discovered cells by doing this. He put a slice of cork underneath his microscope. Okay? And what he saw in the cork were these empty rooms. That's where he got the term cell from. Okay? Rooms in a prison or in a monastery are referred to as cells. Okay? So he thought they were empty little rooms. Of course, what he was looking at were dead plant cells. There wasn't anything in them. They truly were empty. Okay? Obviously, we know now that living cells are not empty, but the name has stuck around. Okay? He was looking at, basically took like cork from like a wine bottle or something like that and sliced it really thin and then looked at it under here. This is the lab drawing that he made, okay, of what he saw underneath. Right? And you can see all the little squares that were the cell walls of those plant cells. Yes. The black is the background. Yep. Yep. All right. All right, so he thought cells were empty little rooms, but he is credited with the discovery of cells, even though he was a physicist, which just goes to show you physicists are always the most important people. All right, a little later on, a guy named Anton van Leeuwenhoek, okay, studied microorganisms using a microscope that he developed, which thankfully didn't catch on because it's odd and difficult to use. Okay, his microscope had a small lens, okay, and kind of looked like a ping pong paddle, okay, but it had a hole in it and a lens in that hole. So what he would do is on the top of this little device here, it was kind of concave. It looked kind of like this at the top. Okay, if you can imagine that in kind of 3 dimensions. Okay, there was this dip in there, and he could put fluid in that, and then light would come from this direction through the object, through the lens, and then when it went through the lens, it would diverge, and he could project it onto a screen, and it would be bigger. Okay, that was how his microscope worked. But of course, that involved having to hold it, and to focus it, you would have to move back and forth, and you had to have really bright light in a really dark room, and like it magnified 300 times, which was a big deal, but it was incredibly difficult to use. So the kind of idea didn't really catch on. It was only a single lens microscope, whereas Hooke's design of having multiple lenses made more sense, okay? And it's what we still use today. All right. So he, Anton van Leeuwenhoek that is, was the first person to view living cells. Okay, so you had Hooke, who looked at cells that were dead. And then he kind of quit because he wasn't a biologist. He moved on to more important things like physics. Okay, but Leeuwenhoek, okay, he looked at a lot of living cells. Right, so he looked at like things that are in pond water. So he would have seen amoebas and paramecia and diatoms and things like that. Okay, he looked at blood cells and prick his finger and look at the cells that were in there. He got sperm cells from bulls. I don't know how he did that. He's obviously very brave or very stupid. I don't know which. Probably a combination of both. Okay, yeah, and he was able to look at essentially all of those kinds of things. And he could see that they weren't empty little rooms. That was the big step forward that he made, was cells are a machine. Okay? They're a living machine that is able to do a lot of things. Okay? Obviously, Hooke never discovered that. He just discovered, hey, here they are. Pass it on to someone in biology and move on. Okay? Whereas Leeuwenhoek looked at what are they doing. They all seem to have some common parts. That was another thing that he noticed. Okay? A lot of cells seem to share certain structures, even though they were from very different organisms, okay? And things like that. And then finally, we have the two Swedish scientists, okay, Matthias Schleiden and Theodor Schwann, okay, and they came up with the original cell theory. Okay, their hypothesis was if cells are the basic unit of life, and cells and tissue from many different kinds of organisms are viewed under a microscope, then cells will be found in all of them. And they were right. Without exception, every living organism that they viewed had cells. Okay? Because, of course, at the time they were doing things, no one knew about viruses. Okay? They looked at bacteria, they looked at plants, they looked at animals, single-celled organisms, okay? All kinds of things, found cells in all of them. And, again, notice the same thing that Leeuwenhoek found. They got a lot of stuff the same. Certainly there were differences. I mean, plant and animal cells have some differences, but they have more things in common than they have not in common. Okay? And that said something to these guys. Okay? And it said that cells are the basic unit of life, and there are some processes that are similar between all walks of life. Okay? All right, they had pretty good equipment, magnified up to 600 times. Okay? They used what's called an oil immersion lens on their light microscopes, which we don't use here in high school because they're a real bother to maintain, but they do magnify very well. Okay? Our stuff will magnify 400 times, our microscopes that we'll be using soon. Okay, so they proposed the original cell theory. That was their kind of big contribution. Okay, as we got better and better microscopes, we discovered more and more things about cells. Okay, we were able to watch the processes that went on, see what happened to materials inside as the organism carried out its business. Okay, watch the different stages of cell division occur. Okay, but the big thing is this theme of similarities between organisms, or relationships between organisms. Okay? For Schleiden and Schwann, they were only looking at organisms that existed on Earth at the time. But now there's a whole branch of science called micropaleontology. Okay? Paleontology is the study of organisms from the distant past that are extinct. Okay? Micropaleontology looks at microscopic organisms from the past that are extinct. Okay? And what they are finding is that the similarities we're seeing in extant animals, that is animals and plants, well, extant organisms, ones that are alive now, are present all the way back in the fossil record to the earliest record of life. Okay? Most recently, they found an organism on Earth that was almost 4 billion years old. Okay, a fossilized organism that was 4 billion years old. Okay, taking our idea of when life began back even another couple hundred million years. Right? But all the way back to those times, there are still things that are common to all of them. Okay? The presence of genetic material, RNA and DNA, okay? And the presence of certain metabolic structures. All right. We also see similarities between organisms that we know are related. Okay? If you look at vertebrates, animals like ourselves with a backbone, okay, we find that most of our tissue is similar in structure. Okay? Our cardiac muscles all tend to have kind of similar structure. Skeletal muscles, bone, all of that tends to be similar. Okay? All right. Now, organisms that are maybe not so obviously related. Okay? This is bone cells. This is the cells that hold up a plant. Okay, so the cells in the stem, okay, of a plant. We notice certain patterns, densities towards the middle, okay, less dense towards the outside, okay, things like that that would reinforce. They're doing the same job. They're supporting weight, but they're doing it in different organisms. But they still show similar patterns. Okay, that kind of tells us natural selection tends to select for things that work. And even in organisms that are very different, we can still see those similarities. Okay, now what that tells us is if we keep going back and back and back and back and back, we can eventually trace everything back to one single ancestor. Okay, plants, animals, fungus, bacteria, all of it can all be traced back to one ancestral living organism. We haven't done that yet, but we're getting there. Okay, we're narrowing it down. Micropaleontology is working on proving kind of the original living organism on Earth. Okay, and everything is a branch from that. Okay, how do we know that? Well, it can't be coincidence that plant cells, animal cells, fungal cells, bacterial cells have all these processes that are the same. Okay, they wouldn't have evolved those all separately. It's more likely that they came from a common ancestor. Okay, in the same reasoning that you don't look like your parents by accident. Okay, right? You share genetic material with them. Right? It's the same here. Okay, plant cells and animal cells have similar structures because they probably got them from a common ancestor. Okay, and actually there's a lot of research going on with now mitochondrial DNA that is actually showing that there is common sections of DNA between organisms that are very distantly related. Okay, so plant and animal cells side by side here. How many structures do we see that are in common? Like most of them, right? They both have a big purple thing with a little purple thing inside. That's the nucleus, by the way. We'll talk about the actual names later. Okay, they've got this this blue stuff. That's the endoplasmic reticulum. Okay, right here beside the nucleus for both of them. Okay, they've got this smooth endoplasmic reticulum that's also similarly located. They both have these little orange sausage-looking things that are called mitochondria. Okay, everywhere. They both have this thing. Okay, the Golgi apparatus. They both have a cell membrane. Okay? They both have a fluid that fills up the cell, okay, called cytoplasm. They have a lot of things in common. Okay? Do they have a few things that are different? Yeah, sure. Plant cells have a cell wall, animals don't. But that makes sense. Plants don't move around, animals do. If we had cell walls on all of our cells, you'd look like you were in Minecraft. Okay? You'd just be all blocky, okay? And it would be hard to move around, right? But if you're an animal, you're flexible. All right, we'll talk more about that tomorrow.